How dare you insult me? You deserved far worse than a mere slap.
Do you know who I am? You will regret this insolence, I assure you.
One sharp smack echoed across the glittering terrace, silencing the whispering aristocrats lingering near the balustrade. Genevieve Caldwell had just struck the most infuriating stranger in London. What she didn't know, as she glared into his mocking, silver-flecked eyes, was that her reckless hand had just assaulted the fiercely private Duke of Clevedon. Beneath the towering crystal chandeliers of the Duchess of Richmond's annual Masquerade Ball, London's high society danced on a precipice of scandal and ruin. It was the winter of 1882, a season defined by ruthless social climbing and quiet desperation. Genevieve Caldwell stood near a towering column of imported marble, her face half concealed by a delicate mask of gilded lace. To the casual observer, she was merely another aristocratic beauty gracing the ballroom. In reality, she was a woman backed into a corner, bearing the weight of her family's impending destruction. Her father, Sir Reginald Caldwell, had lost the entirety of their estate's fortune during the catastrophic collapse of the City of Glasgow Bank. Now, their ancestral home, Oakhaven, was heavily mortgaged to Lord Alistair Covington, a man whose immense wealth was matched only by his legendary cruelty. Covington had made his terms abundantly clear. He would forgive the crippling debt only if Genevieve became his wife. Tonight was supposed to be her final, desperate attempt to secure a patron or a respectable suitor to save her father from debtor's prison and herself from Covington's grasp. The air inside the ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive French perfumes and burning beeswax candles. Genevieve navigated the suffocating crowd, her emerald green velvet gown cleverly remade by her own hands from her late mother's wardrobe sweeping the polished floorboards. She felt entirely out of place among the heirs to the Rothschild and Baring banking fortunes, their careless laughter a harsh contrast to the panic gripping her chest. Seeking a moment's respite from the oppressive heat and the predatory gazes of masked gentlemen, she slipped through the heavy velvet drapery and stepped out onto the moonlit terrace. The winter air was sharp, biting at her bare shoulders, but the cold was a welcome relief. She gripped the cold stone of the balustrade, closing her eyes and listening to the distant, muffled strains of a waltz playing inside. Running away so early, little bird? The auction inside has barely begun. Genevieve gasped, her eyes snapping open. Leaning against a marble statue of Apollo, completely obscured by the shadows, was a man. He stepped forward into the pale moonlight, revealing a tall, imposing figure clad in stark, impeccable evening wear. Unlike the other gentlemen who wore their military medals or colorful sashes with pride, this man was dressed entirely in black. His face was hidden behind a severe, obsidian half-mask that covered everything but his sharp jawline and a pair of penetrating, silver-flecked eyes. "I am not running away, sir," Genevieve replied, her spine stiffening as she adopted her most imperious tone. "I merely sought the fresh air, though it seems I have stumbled into a draught of unsolicited insolence instead." The stranger chuckled, a low, resonant sound that vibrated with dangerous amusement. He closed the distance between them with the predatory grace of a stalking panther. "Insolence? Or observation? I watched you in the ballroom. You maneuver through the lords and earls with the precision of a general mapping a battlefield, yet your eyes betray sheer panic. Who is it you are trying to outrun? Or rather, who is it you are trying to trap before the clock strikes midnight and your carriage turns into a pumpkin?" Genevieve's cheeks burned hot beneath her lace mask. The sheer audacity of the man left her momentarily speechless. "You know nothing of me or my circumstances," she hissed, taking a step back. "I suggest you return to the ballroom and find someone else to entertain with your cruel parlor games." "I know the look of a woman calculating the exact price of her own soul," he countered smoothly, his gaze dropping to the frayed hem of her remade gown, a detail no one else had noticed. "It is a tragedy of our society, is it not? A woman of such obvious fire, parading herself in remade velvet, hoping to ensnare a fortune. Tell me, what is the going rate for a baronet's daughter tonight? £50,000? A country estate? The insult struck her like a physical blow. The crushing weight of her father's debt, the looming threat of Lord Covington, and the sheer humiliation of her situation boiled over in an explosive instant. Without thinking, without calculating the social ruin that might follow, Genevieve raised her hand. Smack! The sound cracked like a whip in the frigid night air. Two elderly duchesses who had stepped onto the far end of the terrace gasped in unison, their fans dropping to the stone floor. Genevieve's chest heaved. Her palm stung fiercely, a stark testament to the force of her blow. The stranger's head had snapped to the side. For a terrifying, suspended second, the world stopped spinning. He slowly turned his face back to her. A faint red mark was already blooming across his strong jaw, stark against his pale skin. Before she could retreat, his hand shot out, his long fingers wrapping around her wrist in a grip that was shockingly warm and unyielding. He did not look angry. Instead, his silver eyes blazed with a terrifying, electrified intensity. "A dangerous gamble, little bird," he whispered, his voice dropping to a silken, lethal register. "You have no idea the game you have just entered." Panic finally clawed through Genevieve's anger. She wrenched her wrist from his grasp, turning on her heel, and fled back into the glittering safety of the crowded ballroom, leaving the arrogant stranger standing alone in the dark. Dawn broke over Mayfair with a dreary, relentless rain, mirroring the dread pooling in Genevieve's stomach. She sat at the small mahogany writing desk in her family's modestly rented townhouse on Curzon Street, staring blankly at a cold cup of tea. The morning post had already arrived, bringing with it a flurry of panicked missives from her closest confidant, Lady Clara Cavendish. The gossip columns were completely blind to the identities, but the whispers traveling through the servant network were deafening. A mysterious woman in emerald green had struck a gentleman on the Duchess of Richmond's terrace. Genevieve rubbed her temples, the sting of her own palm a phantom reminder of her monumental lapse in judgment. She had allowed her temper to jeopardize everything. A heavy knock at the front door shattered the quiet of the house. Moments later, the heavy tread of expensive leather boots echoed in the hallway. Genevieve stood just as the parlor doors swung open. Lord Alistair Covington stepped into the room, his presence instantly suffocating the small space. He was a man in his late 40s, meticulously groomed, but with eyes as dead and calculating as a shark's. "Miss Caldwell," Covington purred, casually removing his leather gloves. He did not wait for an invitation to sit, claiming the armchair nearest the unlit hearth. "You departed the Masquerade rather abruptly last evening. I had hoped we might share a dance, or a discussion regarding your father's outstanding promissory notes." Genevieve kept her distance, clasping her trembling hands behind her back. "My father is resting, Lord Covington, and as I have told you before, we are in the process of securing the funds to satisfy the debt." "Are you?" Covington sneered, pulling a folded legal document from his breast pocket. "Because the directors of the Bank of England are quite unforgiving this quarter. I hold the deed to Oakhaven, Genevieve. By Friday noon, unless my ring is on your finger, the bailiffs will throw your ailing father into the street. Do not play the proud martyr with me. You have run out of time." He stood, stepping far too close. Genevieve held her breath, refusing to flinch, as he reached out to trail a single, cold finger down her cheek. "Friday," he whispered, before turning and sweeping out of the room. Genevieve collapsed into her chair, a single tear slipping free. She was entirely trapped. But less than an hour after Covington's departure, the quiet street outside was disrupted by the clatter of heavy hooves and the rumble of carriage wheels. Genevieve peered through the lace curtains and froze. Parked before their modest steps was an enormous, unmarked black carriage. The horses were magnificent, terrifyingly massive beasts. The coachman wore a livery of midnight blue and silver colors she vaguely recognized, but could not immediately place. A footman approached the door. A moment later, their elderly maid entered the parlor, her hands shaking as she presented a thick cream envelope sealed with silver wax. Genevieve broke the seal. The heavy parchment contained only 3 lines of sharp, slanted handwriting. Your presence is required immediately. A carriage waits. Do not keep me waiting twice. There was no signature, only a deeply embossed crest at the top of the page, a rampant lion gripping a shattered sword, the royal crest of the House of Ashford. A cold dread washed over her. She knew the crest from her history tutors. It belonged to the royal cousins of the sovereign, a fiercely reclusive branch of the monarchy known for their ruthless political power. She had struck a royal duke. With no choice, and her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, Genevieve donned her dark woolen cloak and stepped out into the rain. The footman assisted her into the carriage in absolute silence. For nearly 40 minutes, the carriage navigated the slick cobblestones, finally passing through towering wrought iron gates into a sprawling, private estate hidden deep within the city Clevedon house. Genevieve was escorted through cavernous halls lined with centuries of priceless art and suits of armor that seemed to watch her every step. The silence of the house was oppressive. Finally, the footman opened a set of towering oak doors, gesturing for her to enter the library. The room was magnificent, walled with thousands of leather-bound volumes and smelling of cedar and old paper. Standing by the massive arched window, staring out at the rain-lashed gardens, was the man from the terrace. He was not wearing his mask. Genevieve's breath hitched. In the stark daylight, Dominic Ashford, the Duke of Clevedon, was devastatingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic cheekbones, a strong Roman nose, and dark hair swept back from his forehead. But it was his eyes, those piercing, silver-flecked eyes, that commanded absolute authority. He turned slowly, a crystal glass of amber liquid in his hand. The faint, bruised outline of her handprint was still faintly visible on his jaw. "Your Grace," Genevieve whispered, immediately sinking into a deep, trembling curtsy. I did not know. I beg your forgiveness. My actions last night were inexcusable." Dominic set his glass on the desk with a sharp clink. He walked toward her, the silence stretching until it was nearly unbearable. He stopped just inches away, looking down at her bowed head. "Stand up, Miss Caldwell," he commanded softly. Genevieve rose, forcing herself to meet his gaze, expecting the wrath of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. Instead, she found a strange, calculating heat in his eyes. "I did not summon you here to demand your apology," Dominic said, his voice a low velvet rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. "I investigated you after you fled. I know about the collapse of the Glasgow bank. I know about your father's ruined health. And I know about the vultures circling your estate, specifically Alistair Covington." Genevieve stiffened, her humiliation burning anew. "If you brought me here to mock my ruin, your Grace, then you have had your revenge." "I brought you here," Dominic interrupted, his eyes dropping to her lips before meeting her gaze again, "because your desperate situation, combined with your spectacular lack of deference, makes you exactly the weapon I require." He leaned in closer, his scent of bergamot and rain washing over her. "The Queen has decreed that I must marry the Princess of Denmark by the end of the season. I have no intention of marrying a foreign royal to secure a treaty I despise. I need a scandal, Miss Caldwell. I need an impossible, utterly unsuitable English bride to force the crown to back down." Genevieve stared at him, her mind racing to comprehend his words. Dominic's lips curled into a dangerously wicked smile. "You are going to pretend to be my betrothed. Play the part of the fiery, beloved future Duchess, and I will personally annihilate Lord Covington and erase every penny of your father's debt. Do we have a deal, little bird?" The sheer audacity of the Duke's proposition hung suspended in the heavy, cedar-scented air of the library. Genevieve stared at Dominic Ashford, her mind reeling as she tried to process the magnitude of his words. He was offering her salvation wrapped in high treason. To deceive the crown, to publicly defy Queen Victoria's explicit matrimonial commands, was not merely a scandal, it was a ruinous gamble that could end in exile or worse. Yet, as she looked into the Duke's unyielding silver eyes, she saw the undeniable truth. He was a man who bowed to no sovereign, a man who possessed the wealth and power to shatter Lord Covington's hold over her family with a flick of his wrist. "You are asking me to commit social suicide," Genevieve whispered, her voice barely finding the strength to break the silence. "If the Queen discovers our betrothal is a farce designed to thwart her treaty with Denmark, she will crush us both. I am the daughter of a ruined baronet. I have no armor against the wrath of the monarchy." Dominic stepped closer, his imposing frame casting a long shadow over her. "You have me," he stated, the words carrying a terrifying absolute certainty. "Let the Queen rage. Let Prime Minister Gladstone and his entire cabinet draft their furious memorandums. I am the Duke of Clevedon. The royal treasury relies heavily on my estates in Cornwall and my shipping lines in the East Indies. They cannot touch me, and by extension, they shall not touch you. Your only task is to convince London that you have captured my notoriously cold heart." With her father's life hanging in the balance, Genevieve had no choice. She offered her trembling hand, and Dominic sealed their dangerous pact with a brief, scorching kiss against her knuckles. The transformation began the very next morning. The quiet townhouse on Curzon Street was besieged by an army of Parisian modistes, jewelers, and ladies' maids, all operating under the Duke's strict orders. Genevieve's frayed, remade gowns were discarded, replaced by a breathtaking trousseau of silk, velvet, and Brussels lace. The gossips of Mayfair, already buzzing about the mysterious woman who had slapped a gentleman on the terrace, were sent into an absolute frenzy when the Morning Post announced the sudden, shocking betrothal of the Duke of Clevedon to Miss Genevieve Caldwell. Their first public appearance was meticulously calculated to inflict maximum shock. Dominic chose the opening night of Meyerbeer's L'Africaine at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden. The theater was a glittering sea of diamonds and aristocratic vanity, packed with the most powerful figures in the British Empire. When Dominic escorted Genevieve into the royal box, a profound, stunned silence rippled through the colossal auditorium. Genevieve wore a gown of midnight blue satin, a subtle homage to the Duke's house colors, and around her neck rested the infamous Ashford sapphires, a heavy, priceless collar of stones that had not been worn since Dominic's mother died. She felt the weight of 1,000 judging eyes, and panic threatened to close her throat. Her hand trembled as she rested it on the velvet railing. Sensing her fear, Dominic shifted closer. He did not look at the crowd. His gaze remained fixed solely on her. He reached out, his warm fingers lightly tracing the bare skin of her wrist, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her heart. "Breathe, Genevieve," he murmured, his breath brushing her ear in an intimate display that made 3 countesses in the stalls below gasp behind their ivory fans. "Let them stare. They are looking at the future Duchess of Clevedon. Own the title. Show them the fire that led you to strike me in the dark." Genevieve turned her head, meeting his gaze. For a moment, the charade fractured, and she saw genuine admiration burning in his silver eyes. A strange, authentic warmth blossomed in her chest. She lifted her chin, offering him a radiant, confident smile that belonged entirely to the woman he was teaching her to be. However, across the theater, secluded in a shadowed box on the second tier, Lord Alistair Covington watched the display with murderous intent. He gripped his opera glasses so tightly, his knuckles turned white. He had been outmaneuvered, humiliated, and robbed of his prized possession. The debt on Oakhaven had been mysteriously cleared that very afternoon by an anonymous draft drawn from the Bank of England. Covington knew immediately who was responsible. Covington was a predator, and predators did not surrender their prey lightly. He signaled to a man lingering in the shadows of his box, a disgraced former clerk from the Duke's own solicitor's office, named Higgins. "The Duke is arrogant," Covington sneered, his eyes fixed on Genevieve's brilliant smile. "And arrogant men make mistakes. A sudden betrothal to a penniless girl days before the Danish princess arrives? It is a ploy. a theatrical farce to dodge the Queen's decree. Find the proof, Higgins. Find the contract, the bribe, whatever piece of paper proves this engagement is a fraud. When I expose the Duke's treason to the crown, he will be stripped of his titles, and Miss Caldwell will come crawling back to me. As the opera reached its sweeping crescendo, Genevieve laughed at a comment Dominic whispered in her ear. She was completely unaware that a trap was already closing around them, threatening to turn their beautiful deception into a nightmare of royal proportions. The winter weeks passed in a whirlwind of grand balls, carriage rides through Hyde Park, and quiet evenings spent in the sanctuary of Clevedon House. The line between their dangerous deception and a profound, terrifying reality began to blur entirely. Genevieve found herself memorizing the exact shade of Dominic's eyes, the cadence of his footsteps, and the rare, genuine smiles he reserved only for her behind closed doors. She was falling deeply, irrevocably in love with a man she was contracted to leave once the political storm blew over. The crisis struck 3 days before the Queen's grand winter gala at Buckingham Palace. Genevieve was returning to Curzon Street from a fitting when her carriage was suddenly intercepted in a narrow alley in Mayfair. The door was wrenched open, and Lord Covington stepped inside, his face twisted into a grotesque mask of triumph. He did not speak. He merely dropped a crumpled piece of parchment onto her lap. Genevieve's blood ran cold. It was a copy of the private contract she had signed in Dominic's library, the document explicitly outlining the terms of their fake betrothal and the financial compensation for deceiving the crown. Higgins proved quite useful before the Duke's guards caught him, Covington whispered, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. Tomorrow evening, at the Queen's Gala, I intend to present the original document to Her Majesty and Prime Minister Gladstone. The Duke of Clevedon will be arrested for orchestrating a conspiracy against the throne. His assets will be seized. And you, my dear, will face the wrath of the monarchy. Genevieve could barely breathe. What do you want? She choked out. A simple trade, Covington smiled. You will leave London tonight. Board the midnight train to Paris. Write a public letter breaking the engagement, citing the Duke's cruel temper. Ruin his reputation yourself, and I shall burn the contract. But if you are in London tomorrow, I will destroy him, and I will ensure your father dies in a workhouse. That evening, a torrential downpour battered the glass roof of Victoria Station. Genevieve, dressed in a simple dark cloak, clutched a small leather valise, her heart breaking into 1,000 irreparable pieces. She was abandoning the only man she had ever loved to save his life. The steam from the waiting Paris express billowed across the platform. She took a step toward the train, but a heavy hand suddenly clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around. Dominic stood there, entirely drenched in the freezing rain, his chest heaving, his silver eyes blazing with a fury that terrified her. He did not care who was watching as he pulled her violently against his chest, his arms wrapping around her like bands of steel. "Did you honestly believe you could run from me?" He roared over the hiss of the steam engine, his voice cracking with an emotion she had never heard from him. "I have to go," Genevieve sobbed, fighting against his hold. "Covington has the contract, Dominic. He is going to show the Queen. He will destroy you if I stay." Dominic framed her face with his large, wet hands, forcing her to look at him. "Let him try," he commanded, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Do you think I am some amateur playing at parlor games? I knew Higgins took the document. I let him take it. Genevieve, you are not leaving me. Not tonight. Not ever." The following evening, the grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace was ablaze with thousands of candles. Queen Victoria sat upon her raised dais, her expression severe as Lord Covington stepped forward, a triumphant smirk on his face, clutching the damning document. The entire court held its breath as Dominic and Genevieve stepped forward to meet him. "Your Majesty," Covington announced, his voice echoing off the gilded walls, "I bring proof of a vile deception. The Duke of Clevedon has conspired against the crown. This betrothal is a paid farce, designed to insult your royal decree." He thrust the contract toward the Queen's secretary. Dominic did not flinch. He merely adjusted his cuffs, his demeanor terrifyingly calm. "A compelling piece of fiction, Covington," the Duke drawled, "though I am afraid it is quite outdated." Dominic signaled his solicitor, who stepped forward and presented a much heavier, wax-sealed document to the Queen. "What Covington holds is a draft of a betrothal contract, voided the moment we realized a simple engagement was insufficient," Dominic announced to the stunned, silent room. "What I have just presented to Her Majesty is a special marriage license granted by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Miss Caldwell and I were married in a private ceremony 3 days ago. There is no deception, Covington. She is the Duchess of Clevedon, and as a peer of the realm, my wife is immune to the slander of desperate, bankrupt men." Covington's face drained of all color. "Bankrupt?" he sputtered. "Indeed." Dominic smiled ruthlessly. "While you were obsessing over my wife, I purchased every single one of your outstanding debts from the Bank of England and your private creditors. You are utterly ruined, Alistair. My solicitors are foreclosing on your properties as we speak." A collective gasp swept through the aristocracy. Covington staggered backward, entirely broken, before turning and fleeing the ballroom in ultimate disgrace. The Queen, reviewing the legal marriage license, finally allowed a faint, approving smile to touch her lips, nodding silently to the Duke. The political crisis was averted. A legal marriage could not be undone by royal decree. Dominic turned to Genevieve, pulling her into his arms, amidst the glittering royalty of Europe. "You slapped me into reality that night on the terrace, my fierce little bird," he whispered, lowering his head, "and I have been yours ever since." He kissed her fiercely, no longer a charade, but a true, triumphant promise, forever sealed in front of the world. The drama, the deception, and that satisfying twist at the end. Genevieve and Dominic's story proves that, sometimes, the greatest love begins with a spark of pure defiance. If this high society scandal kept you on the edge of your seat, please like this video, share it with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking historical tales, royal secrets, and epic love stories. Don't miss our next adventure.